worldwide depression and World War II, that we, the global economy, got together and set up institutions such as the United Nations, the World Bank, and the IMF to make sure that what is essentially a national problem doesn't become a global problem. So one of the reasons why 2008 doesn't become a global problem is because there's much more coordination between between ministers of finance, treasury secretaries, central bankers, business leaders, to make sure that we don't replicate the mistakes of the 1930s. And you didn't hear about retaliatory tariffs and tit-for-tat strategies in the last 4 or 5 years. We learned something from that episode. The third reason why the global recession stayed a global recession and never became a depression, because unlike in the 1930s, the only major economic power of that time was the United States. The UK was starting to already diminish in importance, and it was starting to figure out how to exit countries like India. So it is no longer the superpower it was in the 19th and early 20th century. The US was. Unlike in the present, right? Because all the rest of the world was colonies. Either they were Belgian colonies, Dutch colonies, British colonies, or Portuguese colonies. The US remained a superpower, and then of course the rise of Russia comes much later. But unlike now, because of developments across the globe in the last 50 years, for the very first time, when the US stumbled and European Union stumbled, you had some bright lights, including the one we live in, right? India was doing relatively well. China was doing relatively well at that time in 2008, 9, 10, the so-called BRIC countries, right? So for the first time, the global economy had some balancing. So when this side went down, it didn't pull everything down. You had these countries start to rise up and sort of balance the economy, right? So one of the things that was happened in the last 300 years is, on the one hand, there's been this incredible explosion of what is globalization, and what can be globalized gets globalized. What we thought previously could never be traded now gets tradable routinely. I remember talking to radiologists in the US, thinking they had a very safe profession because everybody needs an X-ray and everybody needs to have a radiology degree. Nowadays, that X-ray gets sent on a computer, somebody in Kerala is reading it and sending the results back, and there is no demand for radiology anymore. So this idea of what we used to teach, even when I was a student of international trade at Delhi School of Economics, so what is a tradable commodity and what is a non-tradable commodity, is being thrown to the dustbin. Every day it is changing. And this pressure on defining what is tradable and not tradable is something that is new to all of us in the last 20 years. And so businesses that are dealing with tradable inputs and non-tradable inputs are living this experience, because in the last 20 years the technology has made it, has increased the ability for what we call the porous nature of boundaries and the porous nature of what is a jurisdiction. So we will, as I said earlier, we will have to come up with new laws and new policies to adjust to this reality, but we are not there yet. So we are in the midst of this transformation that we are seeing, just like Adam Smith was in the midst of the transformation he was witnessing, which was the first major transformation, which was the Industrial Revolution. And the reason I purposely strung these titles together is because, not just because I study these, but because trade and technology are it's the absolute twin effects by which these mechanisms get transformed. They are the transformation mechanisms that connects the globe, right? And oftentimes trade gets articulated in agreements. You have the WTO agreement on Doha, which we are still trying to figure out. You have bilateral trade agreements. You have trade ministers who go out and negotiate trade agreements. Technology does it in a much more insidious, much more behind the scenes, but ultimately it's technology that transforms the way we connect ourselves. The phrase that we heard, as I said in my welcome remarks, is this is the year we will be marking the 25th anniversary of when India decides to throw off its socialist regime and follow the Soviet Union and decide that it needs to introduce market-oriented reforms.